Hi, everyone. Welcome to CACFP, Reflecting on the Past and Shaping the Future, co-hosted by FRAC and the National CACFP Association. I'm Steve Hayward, FRAC's Communications Manager. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 60 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, click Show Captions in the bottom taskbar and select English as the spoken language. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. To ask a question at any time, please use the Q&A tab, also in the bottom taskbar. With that, I'll pass it off to Clarissa Hayes, Deputy Director of Child Nutrition Programs and Policy at FRAC. Take it away, Clarissa.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. And hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today, which is CACFP Reflecting on the Past and Shaping the Future. We are so excited to be digging into this topic and really want to focus on where CACFP has been, where we are now, and some of the opportunities that we see ahead. So the goal of this webinar is really to set the groundwork for some future conversations, and we aim to increase participation and access to the program. So we really hope this webinar is helpful whether you are new to CACFP or a seasoned veteran. And like Steve mentioned, we are thrilled to be co-hosting this webinar today with some of our favorite CACFP partners, the National CACFP Association. So we have a pretty full agenda, so let's go ahead and dive in. Before I get to the agenda slide, I just wanted to talk about who will be speaking today. So you've already heard from me, Clarissa Hayes, Deputy Director of the Child Nutrition Programs at FRAC. I am also joined by my colleague, Lauren Walcott, who is a Emerson Hunger Fellow supporting our child nutrition and SNAP work. And she has been here with us since February and actually wraps up her time with us next Tuesday. So we're very excited that she's able to join us for this conversation. And then from NCA, we have Alexia Thex, who is the Vice President of Policy, Partnerships, and Events at the National CACFP Association, as well as Mackenzie Bruner, who's the Policy and Outreach Specialist at NCA. So we are very thrilled to present this as a collaborative effort today. All right, next slide, please. So here is an overview of our agenda for today. What we are going to do is we are going to spend some time with a refresher on CACFP, so its history and its structure, and then we're going to talk about the current state of participation because we think it's really important to see where we are and where there are opportunities before we talk about those strategies. And then from there, we'll talk about some of the challenges to CACFP participation, opportunities on both the state and the federal levels. And like Steve mentioned, we will wrap up with a Q&A. So if you do have any questions as we go through, please feel free to use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will make sure to get to your question today. All right, so next slide. So before we go any further, I'm hoping this works. We're going to do a quick poll to see who we have joining us today. So you should see a poll option show up on your screen shortly. And we would just love to know, what is your current involvement with CACFP? Are you a state agency, an advocate, a sponsor of the program, a family daycare home or center partner, or if you are something else that's not reflected here, feel free to put that in the chat, but we would just love to know who's here and how we can make sure that you are getting your questions and focus covered. So we'll give everybody maybe 30 more seconds and then we'll wrap that up. All right. I'm hoping something will magically show up on my screen. Here we go. All right. So we do have over 50% say other. So if you can, please feel free to put in the chat where you're from and what brought you to this webinar. Why are you interested in CACFP? Because I find that very fascinating. But we have a good mix of state agencies, advocates, sponsors, and providers. So awesome. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead to the next slide. And at this time, like I mentioned, we are going to spend a little bit of time just setting the scene and revisiting those CACFP basics for anyone who is joining us today and completely new to the program. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Lauren to walk us through this.
Yeah, thank you, Clarissa. So hi, everyone. I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with CACFP, but I'll quickly make sure we're all on the same page as we dive into the rest of this webinar. So first, I'll go into our history, which is that CACFP has almost a 50-year-long history of providing meals, and it was first created to help prevent disease and improve nutrition in childcare. It originally started as a 3-year pilot program before it became a public law in 1968 as the Special Food Service Program for Children. The program then expanded to family child care homes in 1976 and became a permanent program called the Child Care Food Program in 1978. It then expanded again to include adult care and was renamed the Child and Adult Care Food Program that we all know and love in 1987. And finally, in 2010, it included after-school suppers and became available in all states. Next slide, please. Okay, so currently CACFP provides meal reimbursements for serving nutritious meals and snacks to all eligible participants in childcare centers, daycare homes, Head Start programs, after-school programs, emergency homeless shelters, and adult daycare centers. So a bit about the structure. CACFP is a federally funded program, and so it goes through the USDA and is administered by state agencies to independent centers or to sponsoring organizations that then represent family child care providers and other centers. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then for eligibility, so this is a program that children that are ages 12 and under can participate in, as well as migrant children up to age 15, youth in at-risk after-school programs, emergency shelters up to age 18, and individuals with disabilities or those aged 60 and older in adult daycare centers. For the eligibility, providers can participate if they are a for-profit childcare center that also meets the 25% low-income eligibility threshold in order to qualify for this program each month. You can also, like all nonprofit centers are always eligible, and at-risk after-school programs are eligible if at least 50% of the local school district is identified as low income. And then for reimbursements, childcare centers are partially reimbursed at the free, reduced, or paid rates, depending on family income. And family childcare programs receive varying rates of partial reimbursement through a 2-tiered system. And so if you look at the picture to the right over here, this is the current reimbursement chart, and the rates are updated annually every July. Next slide, thank you. And then for meals and meal patterns, all meals and snacks served through CACFP must meet federal nutrition guidelines, and care settings can be reimbursed for up to 2 meals and 1 snack, or 1 meal and 2 snacks served to program participants each day. At-risk after-school programs can serve and needed snacks and suppers as part of the enrichment activities to school-age children each day. And research shows that children who participate in CACFP have healthier diets compared to those who do not. So CACFP has many, many benefits, and this is because it plays an important role in improving the quality of childcare programs and making childcare more affordable for low-income parents. It also helps reduce food insecurity, boosts learning and development, and supports families' abilities to work, supports jobs in childcare, supports local economies, and is recognized as a quality indicator. I will now turn it over to Alexia and Mackenzie to talk about the state of CACFP.
Thanks so much, Lauren. And thanks everyone for joining today. I know Clarissa introduced me. I'm Mackenzie Bruner, the Policy and Outreach Specialist with the National CACFP Association. And we thought it would be great to kind of set the scene and help you understand the landscape of CACFP right now. So next slide. So the CACFP, although it's a vital program, has seen a decline in participation for many years now. And one of the things that we've been focusing on is the decline in family childcare home sponsoring organizations. So Lauren mentioned sponsoring organizations, and they are vital for family homes to access the CACFP. Unlike a center, they cannot contract with a state agency. They are only able to access the program through a sponsoring organization. So we can see that sponsoring organizations since pre-pandemic have dropped by over 100 sponsoring organizations. Although it might seem, oh, you still have 512 family home sponsors, that's not really a problem. But really, you might have like 20 sponsoring organizations in Texas and 1 in Wyoming. So that really does have an impact if a sponsoring organization leaves a program, the providers in their area or the family homes in their area or in the entire state could lose access to the program. So that is on the decline, and many state agencies are currently working on trying to onboard new sponsoring organizations and mitigate that risk. So if we move to the next slide, one of the reasons why we see family home sponsoring organizations leaving the program is because there's a decline in family homes that are participating in the CACFP. So you can see it's dropped. Over 20,000 homes have stopped participating in the CACFP since 2019. Some of that could be due to business closure during the pandemic, or just an overall decline in family homes in the child care sector. There could be a shift to child care centers instead of family homes. So this is also a concerning decline that's happening, and of course is having an impact on access to nutritious meals for children in their areas as well. So if we move to the next slide, one of the other reasons why we may see a drop in participation of family homes is due to the tiering system that they have. So family homes are split into two tiers. Tier 1 are those who are in an area with more low-income children, and Tier 2 are those who don't meet that eligibility qualification. Tier 2 family homes receive about half the amount of reimbursement that a Tier 1 home would receive. So you can see a majority of homes participating in the program are those that qualify as Tier 1. And then there's a smaller, maybe about 6% of homes are Tier 2. So again, the lack in participation could be due to the low reimbursement is not worth their participation. But you can see overall that there's been a decline in both Tier 1 and Tier 2 participation in the home, participation in CACFP. So it's not necessarily due to any changes in tiering. It's mostly due to just a general decline in family homes. So if we move to the next slide, we also wanted to put this up against, as I mentioned, it could be a decline in family home businesses in general. So our partners at Childcare Aware of America pulled together the amount of licensed family homes across the United States. And there has been a continuous decline in family homes from 2019 to 2023. But in this past year, there actually has been an increase in the number of licensed family homes in the United States. So while previously we could have correlated the drop in family home participation in CACFP to just a lack or a loss of family home businesses, we can see there's a continued decline in 2024, even though there was an increase in the number of family home businesses. So that was just something we wanted to pull together. About 67% of family homes do participate in the CACFP, but this doesn't account for family homes who are unlicensed. So unlicensed family homes in some states can participate in CACFP, so they're not quite factored in here. And then if we move to the next slide, we can see similar information for child care centers. So child care center businesses have continued to rise throughout the years as the child care landscape has shifted more towards the center atmosphere. But CACFP participation by centers seems to be a little more volatile. So again, from 2022 to 2024, we see businesses have increased by 5,000, but participation in CACFP has decreased by 2,000. One of the reasons for this, why there are more and more licensed centers, they could be for-profit centers that are ineligible to participate in the CACFP. So like Lauren mentioned, a for-profit center has to have 25% of children eligible or low-income children eligible for free and reduced price meals. So if they don't meet that, that could be one of the reasons why we're continuing to see a decline in CACFP despite the increase in businesses. If we move to the next slide, I just wanted to show a little breakdown of what are these child care centers we're talking about. I know FRAC does a lot of work with at-risk after school, and they do make up a majority of the centers participating in CACFP, followed by for-profit childcare centers, and then Head Start is a big part of participation in CACFP, and then a small number of outside school hours care centers, and then emergency shelters. So those have mostly stayed consistent, but at-risk after school is where we're kind of seeing the fluctuation in participation. All right, and so of course, I just told you there's been a decrease in childcare centers and family homes participating in the CACFP, so less children and adults are going to have access to these nutritious meals. So since 2019, over 113,000 less children and adults are receiving nutritious meals through the program. And then I did want to point out that family homes make up about 50% of that decline in participation, despite only being about 13% of the program. So there's been a disproportionate decline for family homes compared to centers, child and adult care centers. All right, and then so we are seeing this decline, of course, here at NCA, we like to dig into why might this be happening. So we survey our members and community CACFP participants to kind of get to the bottom of this. So if you move to the next slide. We do have a one-pager. We did a full report on the state of the CACFP, and we have this neat little one-pager kind of outlining the key problems. And consistently, not just this year, but always, insufficient reimbursement has been the biggest barrier to participation for providers. About 79% of them say it does not cover their food cost. And when I say food costs, I mean actually purchasing the meals or going to the grocery store and buying the food. So 79% of them say reimbursement doesn't meet their grocery costs. And then 93% of them say it does not cover their labor costs. So those are the staff in the kitchen making the meal or going to purchase the food as well. And despite this, that reimbursement is not meeting the needs or the cost of producing meals, 22% of providers are serving more meals than they're reimbursed for. So they're going into their own budget, into their own pocket to make sure that the kids and adults in their care are receiving as many meals as they need during the time that they're in care. So then if we move to the next slide, the USDA did an analysis back in 2016 that showed the actual cost to provide a meal in CACFP, and we compared that to CACFP reimbursement rates based on if you're a center, if you're a home, and what level of reimbursement you're receiving. And that's what we have here. And what you can see is very clearly meal cost is much greater than the reimbursement providers are receiving, regardless of at what level they're receiving reimbursement. USDA did last week, I believe, release their second iteration of this study. So these numbers have been updated, and they are now 2022-2023 numbers and are more accurate to today. We just haven't had time to update those. But there's still a significant difference between the price of meals to produce a meal and the CACFP reimbursement. Next slide, please. All right, and so I've already outlined there's been a concerning decline in program participation. When we spoke with sponsoring organizations, almost half of them said that their biggest challenge is recruiting new providers to the program and retaining their current providers. So not only are they having a problem getting people to invest in the program, but it's getting more difficult for them to encourage providers to stay on the program despite the challenges that they're facing. And then we've also, as I mentioned, there's been a 6% decline in family home sponsors in the past year. And then 12% of providers have stopped operating the CACFP as well. So next slide, the second most significant barrier to participation is consistently the paperwork burden that providers have. So 46% of providers said this is their biggest challenge, even greater than reimbursement. They indicate that paperwork burden is a barrier to participation and is a reason why they wouldn't want to participate in the program. And then 87% of sponsors support modernizing the program and just making it easier for them to sponsor the program and recruit new people to the program as well. But regardless of all of these challenges, a really happy thought is that 96% of CACFP providers recognize the importance of the program and would still recommend it to other providers. So there is light in the dark. Everyone sees how important this program is.
Great. And I will just jump in here real quick and then turn it over to Lauren to talk more about opportunities. But I just wanted to share a little bit more about everything we've talked about in light of federal context and the landscape there. So I think everybody has heard in the news and over the last couple of months, budget reconciliation was the real big vehicle that was being talked about. And while there are cuts to SNAP and Medicaid in that bill, there are no cuts directly to CACFP. But we do know that cuts to SNAP could have a negative impact on CACFP access. And that is because if there are fewer families on SNAP, then there are fewer kids who are directly certified for free or reduced price meals. And like Lauren mentioned earlier, that data source is how some components of CACFP are deemed eligible to participate. So it's not to say those kids wouldn't be eligible for free or reduced price meals. They just would no longer have that direct pathway that made it easier. And sometimes families do not fill out applications. So we're keeping an eye on that, but definitely wanted to touch on that as we think about some of these other background pieces. And then, like Mackenzie mentioned, the Early Care and Education Foundation here is critical for CACFP. We know that if there aren't family daycare homes or childcare centers that are participating or operating, then we can't get these meals to the children that need them. So as we look forward and as we move ahead, we definitely want to make sure that protecting ECE funding, whether it be Head Start, 21st Century, which the funds for that have been held up for the last couple of weeks, we want to make sure that that is part of this broader conversation as we think about access to CACFP. So with that said, we'll talk a little bit more about the federal landscape in just a bit with child nutrition reauthorization, some of the bills, but I will go ahead and turn it over to Lauren again to talk through some of the state opportunities that are currently out there.
Yeah. So in addition to opportunities on the federal level, which we'll get into shortly, there are also strategies that states can take up to increase access to CACFP. So there are state funding opportunities. So in states like Vermont, they were able to pass some legislation that helped them. So in Vermont, they lost 2 sponsoring organizations in 2024, leaving the state with only 3 sponsors for over 200 family daycare homes. This prompted advocacy organizations like Hunger Free Vermont to advocate for an appropriation of $182,000 to the Vermont Agency of Education to distribute between sponsors as an incentive to participate in the program. And then additionally in Oregon, like a lot of states during the COVID-19 pandemic, the reimbursement was increased by 10 cents to make for all of the eligible meals and snacks. And this temporarily helped providers stay in the program and maintain participation rates throughout the pandemic. And since this worked so well, Oregon introduced House Bill 3201 in the Oregon State Legislature to increase reimbursements for Oregon providers to maintain their CACFP programs. So either hoping to maintain or in some spots eventually grow participation. There are other examples as well. So other opportunities include the nationwide waiver of monitoring requirements for sponsors, which became an option during the COVID-19 pandemic. The waiver allows state agencies and sponsoring organizations to waive the requirements for on-site monitoring. And this helped save sponsors time and money, and this led to the USDA extending the waivers so states can still submit applications for approval. And so Colorado is a state that took advantage of this waiver. And so, for example, the Department of Public Health and Environment cited their geographical and financial barriers in their waiver request, stating that sponsors were traveling up to 5 hours for visits. And the long travel time prompted them to include an additional offsite visit request for 2 remote monitoring visits because providers were over 50 miles away from the sponsor's location. So this again saved a lot of time and money and made it easier for sponsoring organizations to manage their caseload of sites that they're supporting. And I will pass it on to Alexia.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, everybody, and nice to see everyone online. I'm here to talk about the solutions and what we are doing to advocate on behalf of everyone for the CACFP. So first, you can see that there are technically 4 bills in Congress to help mitigate some of these barriers that exist in CACFP. The first of them is Child Nutrition Enhancement Act. And that would add 10 cents to reimbursement for all eligible meals and snacks. It also eliminates tiering. You heard Mackenzie talk about tier 1 and tier 2. Essentially, that would allow all tier 2 providers to be reimbursed at the tier 1 rates. And yes, rates have not come out this month. We are waiting for those, for all of you who are waiting for the reimbursement rates for the next year. And then if you don't know, this is kind of like a minutia ask, but if you're a family home provider, you have to fill out the application if you want reimbursement for your own child. So this would allow, ensure that family child care providers can submit reimbursement for their own child. Then Early Childhood Nutrition Improvement Act. Also on both the House and the Senate side, it adds reimbursement for an additional meal or snack. As you heard Mackenzie talk about, about 22% reported providing those additional meals every day for those children that are in care for 8 hours or more. This also changes the CPI to away from home for family child care, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about why that's important in a moment. It simplifies reporting for for-profit centers. For-profit centers right now have to do their eligibility every single month, and this would allow them to do it annually. And then it also calls on the secretary to review the serious deficiency process. This is still in our in this bill, but we are waiting on the final rule for serious deficiency from USDA, which we expect hopefully will come out in the next few months. And then finally, it establishes an advisory committee for CACFP on CACFP paperwork. Sorry. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the 10 cents. In the legislation, in 2010, during the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, they increased the NSLP reimbursement rate by 6 cents per meal. And this was to accommodate the new meal patterns that were introduced for both schools and CACFP. But there was no increase for CACFP. And so we're asking for those 10 cents to accommodate for those new meal patterns that were introduced in 2010 and were actually implemented in 2017. What this has led to is basically it decreases the variety of foods that that providers serve. It also decreases the amount of fresh fruits and vegetables, so they just serve less variety of that, and served canned versions. And not that there's anything wrong with canned, but less fresh fruits and vegetables are more expensive. And it also decreases participation. Next slide. And then, of course, providers, since the pandemic especially, have seen increased food cost. They also want to be able to pay their staff a fair wage, so those 10 cents are important. And there's also a general increased cost of doing business, especially after the pandemic. So those 10 cents would really go and help pay for labor as well. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the elimination of tiering. This is a barrier participation for family childcare, as Mackenzie spoke about earlier. It also significantly increases the administrative burden for the sponsor. So prior to tiering, which was in 1996, a sponsor just had to look at area eligibility. But now, regularly, they have to, when they bring on a home, they have to do the eligibility for each home that they bring on. And the administrative burden of that is pretty significant. So just at the bottom, you can see, I'm not going to read you that quote, but that's one of the quotes from the survey that we did, the annual report. And just to kind of give you an idea, the snack reimbursement for a tier 2 provider is only 26 cents. Next slide. Yep. And then we also asked for reimbursement for the additional meal or snack. And of course, we don't want, as our friends always say, we want the good version and not the cheap version. So we want people to pick between a meal and a snack. We also want it based on the facility hours, so 8 hours or more. This is important to address the administrative burden of this policy. We don't want it tied to the child so that providers don't have to pick between and try to keep track of what kids are coming in and out of childcare and counting the number of hours each child is coming in and out. So we want it based on the facility so there's not an increased administrative burden. And this would be for childcare centers, family childcare homes, and adult daycare. And then finally, providers are already serving the meals. I don't want to give the impression that providers are not feeding children. We just want them to get reimbursed for those meals that they're already serving because the kids are there longer than 8 hours. Next slide. And then I spoke about CPI. So this is the month, every July, reimbursement rates are basically announced, and they are based on the CPI, which is basically the inflation rate. So for homes, it's based on food at home. And for childcare centers, currently it's based on food away from home. And so I'm going to show you a slide in a minute, but basically that creates an inequity in the reimbursement for homes. So as a reminder that family homes do not have access to large quantity purchases through food service. They often can't maintain those minimums that are required. And they do deserve reimbursement equity, just like childcare centers have. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So this is a graph that we put together at NCA. And I know the lines are a little bit small, but just follow with me. The center line, which is basically the blue line, is centers contracting, is the reimbursement rate for centers contracting with a sponsor that gets the free rate, okay? And that is taking into account, taking away 15%, that if you contract with the sponsor, they're keeping 15% of reimbursement. So that is from 1999 through 2024, the free rate for centers. Then the orange line is the homes, okay, that are tier 1, so also free, right? And the home rate, you can see, follows a different path, and that's because they're based on a different CPI. You can see that over time, they have, like, the disparity in reimbursement has grown. So we did a fun little experiment, and the gray line, we went back all the way to 1999 and we recalculated the reimbursement rate for homes, tier 1, if they had been based on CPI away from home. And you can see how that line is much more equitable than the orange line today. I want to remind you that they serve the same meals. And so that's why we want that CPI changed so that the disparity will not continue on and grow and grow. Okay, next slide, please. And then we talked a little bit about the administrative burden. For those of you on the call maybe not familiar with CACFP, I want to remind you that in 2015, the USDA Paperwork Committee, as we call it, actually gave Congress a whole ton of solutions on how to reduce the burden in the program. So it basically simplifies reporting for for-profit centers, which is in the bill. It makes some suggestions for the serious deficiency process, and then established this advisory committee permanently. The one that worked on the USDA, they established that advisory committee all the time. So we're expecting to see some of these changes, but very little has been done from this report since 2015. Next slide, please. So USDA, state agencies, and sponsors are all basically very important key players in the CACFP, and we all have to work together to try to reduce the paperwork burden in the program. One thing that we think that has worked really well, and I think, Lauren, you mentioned it earlier, is offsite monitoring. There are several states right now using offsite monitoring as opposed to in-person monitoring. So sponsors are using this right now, and we have found that it expands access, it's cost-effective, it leads to increased technical assistance. So instead of driving all over the place, you are able to stay with that provider a little longer to give more technical assistance with the program. It's also climate friendly. It is shown to improve health and safety and obviously modernizes the program. Next slide. And as I mentioned, several state agencies have offsite monitoring waivers in place. We are hoping that they're able to reapply for the next program year, so they will be able to continue to use this modern approach to monitoring. So let's move away from the bills and talk about MAHA. I'm sure many of you have heard and been following this, but just to kind of give you a timeline, where we're at today is that the most recent thing that has happened is that the Make Our Children Healthier Again assessment has been released. You can see that it was supposed to be released 100 days and they did stick to that, and so let's talk a little bit about that. Next slide. So what do the reports say? In general, it calls out the dietary guidelines for being way too complicated, resulting in less than 10% of American diets aligning with the DGAs. And why the DGAs matter? Well, the CACFP meal patterns are based on the DGAs. Next slide. Some key takeaways from the report, sort of related to CACFP, is an emphasis on whole foods and moving away from ultra-processed foods. I do want to remind everyone that there's not an official rule or definition of ultra-processed foods, but they did give some suggestions in the report. It also claims that 70% of children's calories are coming from these UPFs, or ultra-processed foods. It also calls for the elimination of synthetic dyes and other chemicals in UPFs. And so why does this matter? It could lead to stricter nutritional standards. It could lead to a reduction in ultra-processed foods, depending on the definition for that in CACFP meals. And what would it require to serve more whole foods? More funding, increased reimbursement, and definitely more training. So what's next on the timeline is the Make Our Children Healthy Again strategy, which is due mid-August. We sort of have like August 14th circled on our calendars. So stay tuned, because we do a blog every time these come out from MAHA. So we're just waiting to see what that report says. And then finally, I think both organizations, both FRAC and ourselves, have a lot of resources to help support everyone who is interested or is a stakeholder in the CACFP. So I'll just start with ours and then I'll pass it over to Clarissa. On our website, we have so many resources. I managed to fit some of them on our slides. But our main goal at the CACFP is to make serving meals as easy as possible. So we do house a lot of the USDA materials. We have several issues of our magazines, which basically teach you how to be on the program, give you menu ideas, recipes. We have a menus and recipes site. We try to take all the guidance from USDA and create resources so that it's easy to follow the food program and you can remain compliant. We also know you want to have fun in the program, so we have a bunch of activity sheets. And then we do know that a lot of you are childcare operators first and foremost and are taking care of either children or adults. And so we do have training plans for those of you who want to become more experts in nutrition and in the program. So we have a lot of virtual training modules available for you to take, and of course, some live events. And with that, I'll pass it over to Clarissa.
Thank you, Alexia. Yes, so at frac.org, you can find various resources on CACFP, and we continue to work on new ones. So the big pieces over the last couple of years is we've done some work on farm to ECE. So once you have that CACFP program, how can you work to improve the quality of the meals, get more locally produced foods and produce into those meal sites? Because we know that better meals attract more kids and up those participation numbers. So that's one thing that I want to call out. We've also traditionally done data reports on CACFP. We have some documents and fact sheets on best practices, along with just some more 101 pieces on CACFP. So definitely feel free to check those out. And then on the next slide, I think we're going to go ahead and move into Q&A. So I will give folks a couple of minutes if you have any questions that you're thinking of. But in the meantime, I'm just going to go over the 3 that I've seen come through so far. So the first was a question around data on trends in the total number of daycare homes nationwide. So like Alexia and Mackenzie mentioned, Childcare Aware of America is a great partner here in this regard, and they've done many reports and snapshots of participation. So they have a lot of information there, and I believe they also break it out by state. So I've gone ahead and put that link in the Q&A box, and we'll also make sure that it gets shared out afterwards. So I highly recommend checking that out. They really bring that context of what's happening on the childcare side. And then the second question was, can state agencies that are not administering CACFP apply for a USDA waiver, or does the request have to come from the administering agency? So I believe that this is in regards to the offsite monitoring that we've been talking about, and the agency administering the CACFP would need to apply for that. And then the last question along those same lines is there a list of the states that have been approved for offsite monitoring? And luckily enough, our friends at NCA have a blog on that. So I went ahead and just put that into the Q&A as well. So we will, we'll also make sure that that gets shared out afterwards. All right, so keep those questions coming if you can. If you have put them in the chat, I'd ask that you put them in the Q&A because there's too much in the chat. I can't go back through and find questions. But I think in the meantime, while we give maybe 2 more minutes for questions, if you want to go to the next slide, I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes, obviously thanking NCA for joining us and for, laying the groundwork here with us. We really do think like this is the start of the conversation here, and we're looking forward to hosting more webinars on CACFP and some of the opportunities that exist. And I know just from the poll in the beginning, there are a lot of entities on here who are not providers or sponsors. We have a lot of, we have some state agencies and some advocates. So I would obviously just make the plug that along with all of the federal child nutrition programs, there really is a role here for everybody when we think about CACFP and working through some of those challenges that we talked about today. So I know that FRAC remains ready to connect on this. NCA obviously is an amazing resource if you have any follow-up questions after our webinar today. So I will go ahead, and if we want to go to the next slide and people can copy down our email addresses. Let's see here. So the question is, are there any opportunities through federal channels bills to clarify and provide more consistency in how state agencies interpret the federal rules? There seems to be inconsistent expectations across states, so I'm wondering how state experiences can impact potential streamlining efforts for all. Alexia, do you want to take that, or Mackenzie first, and we can add on?
Yeah. I will say this, there's a reason that there's some leeway for states. We meet with the state agencies every quarter to share best practices, to talk about their different populations. And there are so many doing sort of different things, but addressing their own state, their stakeholders in their state. So that's part of the reason that there's some leeway. A state like Rhode Island is very different than a state from like Texas or California or even Alaska. They want to make sure that they're trying to do the best for the people in their state. So I'll start with that. We do know that it is a challenge and sometimes a barrier because people are sharing information in the new internet age, right? And saying, oh, so different items might be creditable, or they might have flexibilities in how they implement meal times, and some people allow certain things to happen in certain states. So that leads to a little bit of confusion for operators on why, for example, one particular item is creditable in one state or not in another. An example I can give is like Colorado has a state restriction for processed meats and restricts their service and lunch, while other states let you pick whatever you want to for your menu that is creditable in the meat alternate category. So the best way that we have addressed that is to let the states meet together and work together to identify best practices. But that is why you see differences at the state level. Clarissa?
Yeah, I think that is spot on. And the only thing I would add is that, we didn't talk about it much today, but I know, Alexa, you mentioned like the recommendations around streamlining. And so there definitely are opportunities there, and there are streamlining components that states could take advantage of, and some do better than others. And I know there are some partners like the CACFP Roundtable is really looking into that. So it's definitely something that folks are aware of, and we do hope that there is more consistency when possible across states. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but it is something that people are aware of. And obviously, like, the end goal would be to have a program that is fair and consistent across the board. All right. Awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions coming through, and I am not one to hold us if we end early. I think everybody always appreciates a couple minutes back in your day. So we can go ahead and wrap up. All of our information is here on the slide. Like I mentioned, we'll be sending out the recording and follow-up resources afterwards, so you will get all of that. But we definitely, like I said, want this to be the beginning of the conversation. So if you have any questions about CACFP or want to learn more, please do reach out. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Alexia and Mackenzie, for joining us as a co-host for this webinar, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.